can sculpt the game to the point where Entreat is basically game over. It overpowers nearly anything Austin can bring to the table.
Yeah, definitely. These Miracles decks, they kind of live and die by Sensei's Divining Top. And Top is a very powerful card against discard strategies. Basically, it allows you to kind of tuck away whatever your whatever effects you're going to lean on. You can tuck it away in the face of hymns, Liliana's, various other discard spells. So, yeah, Joe is going to be looking to set up that Entreat the Angels on top of his deck, while playing around Thought Seizes and Hymns and things like that.
Absolutely. So Joe Lossett, you see him on the right, was able to 7-0 and then double draw, second overall seed. And of course, can't overstate how important this tournament is for him, looking to cement his lead for the Season 3 point invite to the Players' Championship. And winning this tournament would produce a huge lead over Alex Berncini, Gerard Fabiano, and the rest of the field.
Yeah, for sure. We talked to Joe earlier. He said that this was the last stop for him before the Invitational. He did not anticipate being in DC or in Syracuse. I am kind of curious if he's going to stick to that, if Alex makes a big comeback in one of those two tournaments. But, yeah, taking home a trophy this weekend, that'll really cement that lead. Absolutely.
Though I did talk to Joe, and it sounded like DC might be a possibility.
Okay.
I don't want to speak for him.
I love it. Yeah, so, I mean, I spoke to him early today, and he was saying no.
I spoke to him about a half an hour ago, and it sounded like maybe that was changing a little bit.
Funny how your tune will change. Tell you a thing about Joe Lossett. Joe Lossett loves Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
Loves to compete. And I think that's the real itch that's gotten to him. And taking a look at his opening hand, those are some powerful interactive spells. Funny how that works.
Though, perhaps not enough lands.
I see just the one land with a Brainstorm. Why not?
Well, there's a couple reasons not to.
Yeah, no,
he might just die.
Sure, all right. Yeah, you're right. There are plenty of good reasons not to do that. I don't mulligan much. I'm more of a see what happens kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to spin the wheel here.
You only live once, am I right?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, Joe Lossett certainly he knows his way around this deck a little better than I do. So I would not at all be surprised to see him take a more conservative line and ship this one back for, land number 2.
Yeah. But against a deck that's packing cards like Hymn to Torak and Thoughtseize, Liliana the Veil, sometimes it's better to keep greedy 7-card hands than try to mulligan for the ideal 6.
Yeah, you need your material. And he does have a Brainstorm. He does have one land with which to cast that Brainstorm. So he is going to be able to kind of go digging. He's basically looking at like a virtual 10-card hand to find that second land. But says that's not enough. Looks like he's going back to the well.
Because the question is that hand even good enough? And a couple of copies of Counterbalance against a deck that's packing Abrupt Decay, the one counterspell in that hand, your susceptibility to Wasteland potentially, even if you find your second land, maybe it just is a Tundra that gets blown up.
Sure.
I think that's enough reasons there to send back that hand.
Yeah, and I don't think that is a spot where you can afford to fetch Island specifically. So, yeah, you're right. I think the susceptibility to Wasteland is probably the kind of the straw that breaks it there.
So Joe's list, blue-white, although touching red a tad for a couple main deck red blast. One red Elemental Blast, one Pyroblast.
Yeah, and he did have one of those blasts in his hand. That was kind of like one of the reasons that I was leaning towards keeping that 7. It does give you some insulation against turn 1 Delver of Secrets.
Yeah. Although then you have to fetch a Volcanic, and then Wasteland becomes an issue.
Sure, yeah. Certainly a lot of risks you have to take there. And Joe takes a peek. That 6 is good, and we're off. Turn 1 Sensei's Divining Top. That's step 1.
Again, the most important card in the deck, and I think Austin correctly using a Force of Will here. Do not allow Joe to get this Divining Top in play.
Yeah, I think it is always worth a Force, and probably worth a Force back. So Joe immediately down to 2 cards in hand. That was quick.
But he does have his critical piece in play.
Correct, and that is the most important part. And looks like the most important one drop from Austin as well, I think. Turn 1 Deathrite Shaman off of that Tropical Island. And Joe's going to get to work, spinning that top.
And it looks as though Joe has found a Flooded Strand here. There's a source of Plowshares. There's another land in that top 3. So getting some positive momentum going in spite of his mulligan and then having to force a will on the first turn of the game.
Yeah, actually exactly what he wants there, I think. So Wasteland going to take away that Tundra. We do know that Joe has another land on top of his deck. We don't know if he put it on top. I suspect he didn't, right? He put the swords on top?
I suspect that he did not.
So that's going to put him in a bit of an awkward spot. Basically has to take 2 draw steps to get to the answer to Deathrite Shaman and the land.
Well, the alternative is just break your Flooded Strand and assume that you're going to find a land in your top 3. You give up on the Swords to Plowshares.
Sure. And Deathrite number 2 showing up for Austin. I guess Swords of Plowshares starts to look less important once you have to deal with a second Deathrite anyway.
Yeah, the first Plow, very good against 1 Deathrite Shaman. Now with the second Deathrite Shaman, not clear how much 1 Swords of Plowshares was really worth.
And I believe that was draw and go for Joe. So no hurry. You know, there's actually, well, I said that there is actually kind of a hurry. If you're going to crack the fetch land and then top and go digging for a land, you'd want to do that in your main phase so that you can play the land if you find it.
Yes.
And Liliana going to come down. We know Joe has another copy of Force Will in his hand that is going to be used.
It's a tough spot for Joe there, but if he allows that Liliana to resolve, he's going to lose his whole hand anyway.
True.
So he has to fight that fight. Now down to 1 card and a Flooded Strand and a Divining Top.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you are definitely going to, you're not going to get to use those cards if Liliana sticks. So just rather not have the Liliana in play. Does find the mountain that he knew was there. And I believe we know the last card in his hand is Swords to Plowshares. So the question is, does he want to pull the trigger on that?
Now, interestingly enough, Austin's dealing with some mana issues of his own. He's only on this 1 land. He does have some Deathrite Shamans, but no lands in the graveyard currently. So Austin's development a little suppressed here as well.
True. So, yeah, and that's actually some extra incentive for Joe not to crack the Flooded Strand. Although he could do that and then Swords 1. Austin gets an opportunity to activate the other for mana, but you're still limiting him to just 1 mana unless you find a land off this ponder.
And Joe there, seeing no lands there in the top 3, I think, just wants to shuffle away anyway.
Yeah.
So this might be an opportunity for him to use Swords to Plowshares.
Sure. And so cracks Flooded Strand, fetches up basic plains. There's a mana base for you. Basic mountain, basic plains.
Beautiful. Now this may be a spot where Joe says, I don't really care too much about these death rights for all the reasons I just listed. No lands in the graveyard, no black mana to start activating and removing spells. Joe might be happy to save this copy of Source of Plowshares for something like Tarmogoyf for Tombstalker.
Yeah, that's reasonable. And then just use the mana that he has untapped to give the top another spin at Austin's end step. That actually makes a lot more sense, I think. You would rather sweep away both of these Deathrite Shamans with a Terminus, assuming you get around to finding one. But yeah, the list of things that Joe needs to find here are actually pretty steep. You know, like he definitely cannot last too long without a source of blue mana.
Yeah, the list is creature removal, blue mana, something powerful to do. That's a lot.
Yes, and you are working with just a draw step to find those. Now, we're filtering pretty aggressively with that top, but yeah, and there he is going to give the top a spin. And we found the blue mana, I think. That was a Tundra, it looked like.
Yes.
So step 1.
Yep.
Now, those other 2 cards, not so exciting. Spell Pierce, Counterspell. Actually, Spell Pierce is not bad here.
No, Austin's mana is still fairly pinned.
Again, there's the 1 Flooded Strand now in Joe's graveyard. Austin, of course, can crack that Verdant Catacombs at any time. So with those 2 Deathrite Shamans, we can make 2 mana total. Although that will change as the game progresses. So pulling the trigger on one of them and trying to decide, I think, between, well, going for Liliana, I believe.
Yep.
So cracking the Verdant Catacombs, going to fetch out black mana, and I think that once you see a black dual land in play, that suddenly these Deathrite Shamans become a much bigger problem.
Absolutely. Though, again, it's the second one's still not really impacting things for the time being.
True.
The first one's doing all the work that the second one does.
So Austin, again, I'm assuming going for Liliana. He hasn't cast it yet. There it is, Liliana of the Veil. And we know Joe has a Spell Pierce on top of his deck. So could activate the top, pull up a Spell Pierce and use it here.
And I would imagine that he cannot Spell Pierce this fast enough.
Yeah, and there we go. Sensei is divining top on top. Spell Pierce Liliana. And looks like Austin has no recourse there. Abrupt Decay, Brainstorm, Tombstalker, the cards in Austin's hand.
And Joe's still holding on to the Swords of Plowshare. So if Austin's trying to build towards this Tombstalker, Joe's got an answer to that at the ready too.
Yeah, and I think for the reasons that you have described, you're right. These 2 Deathrite Shamans are not relevant Swords of Plowshares targets. Any one of them individually, I think, would be.
So the option that Austin has here now is he can, and I think he may be doing this, is removing this land to brainstorm,
Okay.
searching for a way to play over the top of the spell pierce.
Okay.
Though-
Basically just looking for, well, Daze won't do it, so it just needs force blue card.
Yeah, I mean, he has only Tombstalker, Abrupt Decay, so this feels like a fairly greedy brainstorm to me. Now, he may want to just kind of cast this anyway. If mana's an issue, he's trying to get stuff in his graveyard for his
Yeah.
Deathrite Shamans and his Tombstalkers, but I think finding a Force of Will in this spot is pretty unlikely.
It is, but yeah, I think you're right. This is a spot where Austin just wants to gas up. There's no sense in sitting around with a brainstorm in your hand when your opponent is stuck with no cards in hand, or at least we know he has one. But I think it's safe to say Joe is in a tough spot with his back more or less against the wall. So this is kind of a spot where Austin wants to like press down on the pedal a little.
Yeah.
So there is there is an argument for holding the brainstorm. Kind of the classic brainstorm discussion. AJ Soccer kind of famously wrote the brainstorm article where he argues never ever cast a brainstorm until you have a fetch land and 2 cards you don't want in your hand. That's maybe a little, I'm oversimplifying his argument even, but you see a lot of times players want to get the most value out of their brainstorm when they are not in an even position or even in a good position. I think a lot of times you just need to cast brainstorm and hope that there are powerful spells that you can find.
I am much more in AJ's camp on brainstorm than most. I grip that thing until the bitter end, but I can appreciate the need to be more aggressive with it sometimes.
Yeah. The first time you die with a brainstorm in your hand.
That's pretty rough.
Yeah. And it's also hard to do because if things get bad, you cast it. But occasionally you'll find yourself bottlenecked on mana or bottlenecked on blue mana in particular. And that's usually the times when you most need to cast the brainstorm to get yourself out of that situation.
Yeah, there's a variety of factors, but I think relative to the average person that I am viewing on camera playing, most weeks I would hold onto my brainstorms more often than people seem to at large that I watch.
That's fair. And sure enough, Austin did actually find the third land that he needed, notably the second black source. So those 2 Deathrite Shamans are going to start to do some serious work.
Yeah, it's a real clock. And the graveyards are pretty flush right now. I mean, you see 2 Force of Wills and a Spell Pierce in Joe's graveyard. You see a Force of Will, a Brainstorm, a Ponder, and Austin's. There's a lot of damage to be dealt.
Yep. And significantly, Joe's out to the, clean out to these 2 Deathrite Shamans is to rip a Terminus. Austin's sitting with a Stifle in his hand.
Yeah. Now, another thing that is noteworthy, I watched Austin play against Miracles the previous round, and he showed a ton of respect for Terminus. You see the Tombstalker in his hand right now. I don't think that's getting deployed this game as long as these Deathrite Shamans are threatening Joe.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense, excluding the Stifle. I think once you have Stifle backup, I might be more willing to pull the trigger early.
Sure.
But it looks like Joe actually is, I think that second black source is kind of the tipping point. It's like, well, I need to kind of stem the bleeding here. So Deathrite 1 of 2 goes farming. And it looks like Underground Sea the draw for Austin, and yeah, we see him counting up his graveyard. I think he is looking to pull the trigger on that Tombstalker.
That seems like a really nice spot. I mean, he can basically pay 3 mana for the Tombstalker, leave up an Underground Sea, and then be able to stifle a Terminus. And if that doesn't happen, then he can activate the Deathrite Shaman.
Yep. And with Daze back up as well, if that could, I can't imagine that mattering, but it's possible that, Joe has to use various effects in order to set up the Terminus in the first place. That could leave him tapped low. Now, Counterspell is going to solve that problem. So, all right, so no Tombstalker for Austin, and loses some of his Deathrite fuel in the process, although Joe's graveyard stocked for several turns worth of Deathrite activations. Joe goes for Sensei's Divining Top. Austin says, okay.
It's crazy the amount of lifting that this Sensei's Divining Top is doing for Joe.
Yeah. And that's how it always plays out, too. Any matchup of Liliana versus Sensei's Divining Top, or, just discard decks in general, it just seems like the Miracles player plays with no hand, but like a virtual 3-card hand on top of their library at all times.
Now, to Austin's credit, he did try to force a will it. I mean, it didn't go into play uncontested.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's not a card you want to resolve. It's really night and day, like how differently these Miracles decks play out when they have Sensei's Divining Top on turn 1 versus when they don't.
Yep.
And Joe, given the top a spin, sees a counterbalance. I think that's the kind of the question he's trying to ask himself: is this worth it? Does it even do anything in this board? He did leave it on top, I believe, but.
So the Goyf's entering play now. Looks like a 2/3, just instants and creatures, most of the graveyard wiped by the Tombstalker a couple turns ago.
Finds a Terminus. Again, Austin does have Stifle. So Austin going to activate Deathrite in response, and we'll see if he. Wow. Okay. So lets the Terminus resolve. That is a Stifle, right?
Yes.
Okay. So possibly just unaware of that interaction.
Possibly.
It is not intuitive the way that the Miracle mechanic works, really. But basically, what happens there is when the Terminus is revealed, there is a trigger that allows the Miracle spell to be cast for its Miracle cost.
Mm-hmm.
So Austin had the opportunity to stifle that trigger and leave Joe with a Terminus in his hand.
Yeah. Now, Joe may be able to reset it down the line with Brainstorms or something like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's fair. I mean, maybe Austin's taking like the super long view there.
But yeah, that felt like a fight worth fighting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you can reset it with Brainstorm. Honestly, if you draw 2 more lands, you can just cast it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a daze there, so that's not reliable either. But and did Austin find any further action? Yes, he did. There's a Tarmogoyf. And Joe completely out of gas. Spins the top. As I said, out of gas relative when there's a top in play.
Yeah. Out of gas / perpetually has infinite gas.
Yes. Yeah, although we have 2 relative blanks on top there in the form of Counterbalance and Spell Pierce. I think takes another peek. That looked like a Terminus in the back there. Whatever it was, he left it on top, so. Simply plays the Caracas from his hand. Caracas not a card with relevant text in this matchup, right? There are no...
Well, Joe's got plenty of legendary creatures of his own.
True, yeah. I mean, Caracas, of course, can do all kinds of fancy tricks with Vendilion Click and with Fencer, Shaper Savant, but will not be bouncing anything of Austin's in this game. Yeah, gives the top another spin on end step, falling to 6 from that Tarmogoyf poke.
Yeah, you mentioned there's another terminus floating around in there.
I believe that's what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the question for Joe is basically, do I want to pull the trigger on this? Yeah, and okay, we have not actually tapped a mana to cast that Terminus yet, so there might be some discussion about triggers this time.
Yeah.
And it looks like we are kind of figuring that out. Austin's going to Brainstorm in response, so I would love to hear this conversation right now.
Yeah. So right now we have a Terminus trigger here. We're seeing at what point here, I mean, there could be verbal communication, there could be, you know, any number of things that influences where we actually are in the resolution of this Terminus.
Mm-hmm. This feels like the kind of situation where Austin is maybe, you know, starting to think, hey, maybe something's amiss here, and like asks for clarification. So like, what exactly is going on with this miracle? And appears to be eyeing the Stifle in his hand. So I think he is in the process of figuring out that this is in fact a legal play he can make.
Yeah. And Joe is going to not offer any assistance, I would imagine.
Yeah,
explaining
that's
this interaction.
Such a fine line for Joe. I mean, Joe certainly is, not going to misrepresent anything, but
yeah.
Joe is going to basically explain exactly what his cards do.
Right. It's one of those things where, you know, it's, can you find the way to communicate to the judge what you want to ask? Because it's a tricky situation. Sure. It's a tricky situation there because, you know, I don't know if you can really ask the judge, can I stifle the terminus? It's
That's true, because you can. You can stifle the terminus trigger.
how do I make this work?
Yes.
I'm asking the question, how do I make this work? A judge really isn't going to give you any assistance there. But if you say, is there a part of terminus being miracle that is a trigger, the judge can clarify it there.
True.
So you have to know the magic words.
Yes.
Which is not ideal, but also you don't want judges playing matches for people. So
Yeah.
you can't have the question be, can I stifle this terminus?
Right, and we are back in the booth because actually Austin took the moment to actually step away from the table to ask the judge a question,
Yeah.
which is something that a lot of players, like especially more casual players, don't realize you can do, actually. If you ever have a judge question that the act of asking the question would give away the contents of your hand, you are allowed to call the judge and ask them a question away from the table.
Happens all the time when I'm asking for the Oracle text on cards.
Yes. In this particular case, Austin couldn't ask the question without revealing that he had terminus in his hand, or sorry, revealing that he had a stifle in his hand. And it looks like he is in fact, well.
Yeah, Joe's topping in response here to the stifle.
All right, okay, so sure. So he does in fact stifle the terminus trigger, which, as I mentioned, does not counter the terminus. Terminus goes back to Joe's hand. Stays in his hand.
Yeah.
And Joe, with no play, just passes the turn. So Austin quickly untaps, cracks in with that Tarmogoyf. And Tarmogoyf, certainly not lethal, but not a hit you want to take at this stage. Okay, so Joe is, before blocker, is going to cast Vendilion Click. Presumably the plan here is to block and then bounce with Caracas.
Yep. This is the Joe Lossett hard lock part 6 of 14 or whatever exists in this deck.
The Joe Lossett force field. Not even a force field, because you don't even take one, right?
Yeah. So now Joe does have the opportunity to take this daze here and just try to buy time until he hits 6 mana, but that is a risky play.
Actually, it's interesting to me that Austin didn't use the daze. Yeah, because the one land that Joe has untapped is that Caracas. So if you force him to tap the Caracas.
Well, the issue is that, Joe falls to not lethal.
True. Okay, and then I guess you know about the terminus in his hand. So
Yeah.
So daze is probably a bigger deal at this point. And it looked like Joe says keep him. So again, no damage from that Tarmogoyf. Vendilion Click jumps in front, does its blocking, retreats thanks to Caracas.
And I like Austin adding another threat to the table here because Vendilion Click plus the Caracas means that, well, can't really attack as things stand.
Right.
It's a little rough to add more to the board in the face of the terminus, but
Yeah, well, and you know you're not going to get terminus the very next turn because you know the top card is Sensei's Divining Top.
yeah.
So Joe may find a land with the top, but he's not going to have the mana to hardcast terminus there anyway. Particularly, he wouldn't do that having left you with the daze.
So potentially a big draw here for Austin with Abrupt Decay.
Insectile Aberration comes out to play. So now there are 2 creatures representing a 2-turn clock. They do combine to actually represent a lethal attack. We know Joe has the Vendilion Click. But actually, Abrupt Decay puts the brakes on that.
Yep, he can click before blocks, or Abrupt Decay this before blocks.
And Austin is going to go for the daze. Floating one suspects a green mana off of that tropical island. And yeah, Joe pays. That's his last mana. And one expects an Abrupt Decay to close out the game here. Boom. No blockers, no mana untapped, lethal damage coming. Joe Lossett falls. Austin Williams takes game.
Joe, as typically does, fought like hell.
He really did.
I mean, there's nothing else you can really say about that game there, but just was a little strained on resources, and we're going to be going to a second game momentarily with Austin Williams up a game. Coming back to the booth here momentarily. Welcome back. Patrick Sullivan, Andrew Stroud, Star City Games Legacy Open here in Dallas. It is trivia time for For those of you unfamiliar with the rules, I'm going to ask you a question. You will tweet your answer at SCG Live, hashtag SCG Premium. Of the correct responses, one will be selected at random for 3 months of Star City Games premium content. It's about accuracy, not speed, so don't worry about submitting first. Just submit accurately, and please note that this contest is run at the sole discretion of StarCityGames.com, and that Twitch TV is in no way affiliated with giveaways on its stream. The question I have for all of you at home is, Joe Lossett, for playing a blue-white Miracles deck, actually has kind of a creature element to the deck. There are 3 different creatures in his main deck. 2 of them are legendary. Can you name the non-legendary creature featured in Joe Lossett's Miracles deck? Again, tweet your answer, SCG Live, hashtag SCG Premium. Moving on to the sideboard. Joe's in front of me at Graphicer's Cage, Pithy Needle, and is it Zadcaster to Rest in Peace to Fluster Storms, Misdirection, Pyroblast, Elemental Blast, Wear Tear, Venser Saber Savant, Council's Judgment, Entreat the Angels, Supreme Verdict.
So many one-ofs.
Perfect.
Right?
Perfect. So the cards that really stand out to me in this matchup, 2 copies of Rest in Peace. Austin's deck relies heavily on the graveyard. Deathrite Shaman, Tarmogoyf, Tombstalker. Seems like a great addition here. The copy of Misdirection seems excellent against a deck with Abrupt Decay.
For sure.
And Hymn to Torak. I like also the cards that kind of normalize, are just normal nuts and bolts magic cards. Things like Venser Shaper Savant, Council's Judgment, Supreme Verdict, Entreat the Angels. Things that are just good in a creature and removal fight, I think are going to do a lot of work for Joe here.
Yeah, a lot of these cards, you call them nuts and bolts magic cards. Those cards often don't feel like sideboard cards. In a deck like this, where you are kind of hyper manipulative of the top of your library, like if you can board in 1 card and it like drastically alters your percentages, because you are much more likely to find it when you're topping away and brainstorming than you would be just drawing a card every turn.
And you can see that kind of scattered all through Joe's deck list. I mean, there's a lot of one-ofs, there's a lot of situational cards. Legacy is a diverse format. You have to have a lot of answers to a lot of different stuff. And in the post-board games, you're often just trying to cut out the worst 5 or 6 cards and bring in the better 5 or 6 cards. And so versatility is at a premium in your sideboard because you want things that can come in a variety of matchups.
Yeah,
and so even though these cards, like you said, don't look like sideboard cards, like when you bring in a Venser, for example,
Right.
it doesn't really make a lot of sense given the needs he has for a million different matchups. It makes sense to see these kind of cards in the sideboard.
Yeah. Over on Austin's side, it's actually kind of the same process at work. Cards like the 4th Force of Will in the board, 2 Spell Pierce, 2 Vendilion Click, 1 Hymn to Torak. Those are all cards, well, sorry, other than Force. Those are cards I expect to come in, actually. And again, they don't feel like sideboard cards. They're more just like generally cards that are good.
They're good magic cards.
Yeah, cards that are good against opponents with cards in hand, cast spells. I don't know. So yeah, I am not excited, of course, about Graphicer's Cage and Null Rod Disfigure. Those are more precision tools.
Well, I think that Null Rod might be in play because of how good Divining Top is.
Oh, sure. Okay.
I don't know. It's not 100%. It's pretty narrow. I definitely expect the Crozan Grip to come in. Now, if the Null Rod comes in, that's an open question. But I do like, again, the normal magic cards in the matchup. The Hymn to Torak here, the 2 Vendilion Clicks. I think those are going to come in and do some work.
Yeah. We see the 4th Force of Will on the board. A lot of Delver decks do that. Force of Will is a card that you absolutely have to have in certain matchups, and you're kind of grumpy about in others.
Yeah.
And I'm not honestly sure which type of matchup this is.
So
yeah, go on.
Oh, sorry. The sideboard that's up on the screen here is 13 cards. I did a quick check.
Oh,
I knew that there was something missing because we saw Austin Williams play against Counterbalance before. Decided in a Creeping Tar Pit. There's a Creeping Tar Pit and a Surgical Extraction in the sideboard as well. I think the Creeping Tar Pit is absolutely coming in here.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just more mana, an extra threat, a threat that you can get around the Counterbalance lock if it comes to that. Yeah, absolutely. Very excited about Tar Pit there.
And definitely a matchup slow enough for Austin to be able to afford it comes into play tap land. So game 2 getting underway momentarily here. Austin definitely the underdog in the matchup given Joe Lossett's experience with Counterbalance, but was able to get through that first game.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of picking the guy who's up a game.
Yeah, that's a good policy.
On the other hand, picking against Joe Lossett, not one of the best policies either. So, yeah, it's a toss-up.
But you can see, there's the disruptive elements that Black brings to the table. Definitely presents challenges that are unique to this matchup, as opposed to Blue-White Red Delver and Rug Delver.
Yeah, we're fighting over the hand, which is, as far as, control decks, mid-range decks, blue decks, as far as those type of decks go, Miracles is actually pretty well equipped to beat that. We saw Joe immediately go down to basically nothing in hand in the first game, and all it took was a top, and the top kept him alive for many, many turns. Having said that, the discard is still very good.
Yeah. Definitely, I would rather have Thoughtseize in this matchup than, say, Lightning Bolt or Swords of Plowshares or the other defining elements of other styles of Delver.
One of the weird tensions here for Austin, I was starting to say this earlier, we see the 1 Force of Will in the board. That complements the 3 that are in the main. Delver decks often do this because they absolutely have to have Force against various unfair decks, but they do not want to 2-for-1 themselves anywhere else. Now, this is a weird spot because you definitely don't want to be 2-for-1ing yourself against Miracles either.
Yep.
But turn 1 Sensei's Divining Top actually is that important.
And there's, when Blue-White Miracles does not have a Divining Top in play, there's a lot of implied mulligans and missed draw steps along the way.
Yep.
Miracle spells that are mistimed, or just kind of a general clunkiness to the cards you're drawing and the efficiency with which you can play them.
Yeah, when there's no top, you don't always draw the perfect card. It's like you're actually playing Magic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think those tops are definitely worth fighting over. I don't know if you keep all 3 of the forces in the main. It's tough to say. On the draw, I think Austin actually has to keep his forces.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, when you're on the play, you can daze the top, you can spell pierce the top, you can Thoughtseize the top. On the draw, however, the top is sticking, and that's what it does. Joe Lossett going to lead with Island, Sensei's Divining Top. And Austin going to fire back, again, with his power 1 drop of choice.
But you had to feel a 7-card hand that Joe kept with a turn 1 Divining Top. He's in really good shape.
So, Underground Sea, fetched up to cast out Deathrite Shaman. Joe goes ahead and takes his turn. Looking like just going to be land go here. Not a lot of main phase action from these Sensei's Divining Top decks.
No. And now Austin, fully informed of the Miracle Stifle interaction. Could be helpful.
Yeah, that's a big edge, actually. If Austin had not allowed the Terminus to resolve the first Terminus last game, I think that game was over a lot quicker.
Oh, for sure.
And second land, 3rd mana source for Austin, but looks like he's just going to pass it back. And Joe gives the requisite spin. And what does he find? More land.
Yep, just making his land drops here and no rush to sacrifice these in the face of a deck playing Stifle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And Stifle's the least of your worries here. Miracles is a deck that wants to cling to its uncracked fetches for dear life.
Yeah, they are 3 fresh looks with a Divining Top,
Yes.
so.
Every Scalding Tarn in play, basically ancestral. Might be a mild exaggeration.
Well, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really close to that.
Yeah. Delver of Secret's going to come down for Austin. Austin hoping to get a little bit of beat down going. And Joe contemplating a response. Going to cast Brainstorm in response to that Delver. I think he does have a Terminus in his hand, so I think there's a possibility that Joe is going to hope to set the Terminus back on top and then cast it in his next draw step. That seems like a pretty reasonable plan. And it looks like there is some discussion here about the timing of this Brainstorm.
It's possible Austin is contemplating a Daze here as well to induce a fetch land activation while Stifle's at the ready. So a lot of potential play here in the face of this Brainstorm.
Yeah, there is actually a lot going on here. I like this play from Austin, actually, if he's going to pull the trigger on both Wasteland and Daze.
Yeah. I mean, he wants to get the Stifle while the getting's good. It also really takes down a lot of the power of this Brainstorm because Joe will sacrifice the fetch land. That gets stifled. Then if he wants that Brainstorm to resolve, he sacrifices other fetch land. Now he doesn't have a shuffle effect, and he's just, again, playing normal Magic.
And it looks like Joe just sends that Brainstorm to the graveyard. So I think he decides it is not worth the fight. chooses not to pay for days and just we'll pick another fight another day.
Update from another side of the bracket. Noah Cohen playing Bug, 2-0 over Edward Bonar playing Storm.
Okay.
Not surprising.
Yeah, that matchup definitely a nightmare for the Storm player. Joe Lossett lets one Brainstorm fall to days uncontested, untaps, immediately plays another. This one's fine.
I do like that Days from Austin.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, Days is a card you really can't afford to sit around with.
Yeah.
Generally, you've got to just Daze in the first available spot. Maybe not the first, but yeah. When you find a spot, you definitely want to strongly consider using the Daze while it's still a relevant Magic card.
And Joe was able to sniff out the trap.
Now, to be fair, he's still sort of caught in it.
Well, if Austin goes ahead and activates this Deathrite Shaman at the end of the turn, then Joe can get rid of all of his fetch lands if he wants to.
That is true. Although if he does that, he loses what he has put on top, and I kind of suspect that one of the cards he put on top of that Brainstorm is a Terminus that he would like to keep.
Another update, Shane Ramel playing Counterbalance, 2-0 over Paul Hargrove playing Dredge. So we have another one of these matchups waiting for us in the other side of the bracket in the semifinals.
I'm okay with that. Actually, I of all the Miracles versus Brainstorm deck matchups, I think I like Bug versus Miracles the most.
Sure.
There's the most play to it of any. Okay. And yeah, sure enough, there is the Terminus. Miracle Trigger on the stack. Joe can fetch up a white source and attempt to cast it. This is another one of those very unintuitive interactions that everyone had to learn once the Miracle mechanic came along.
The Terminus is floating in outer space right now.
Yeah, technically it is in Joe's hand. If you have to be specific, it's in his hand, but it's everywhere.
So it appears that Austin is stifling the Terminus here.
Okay. And this, I believe, is in response to the first Scalding Tarn activation.
Yes.
A lot going on here. Now, Joe does have a red elemental blast in his hand, so he could have fought over that. At least I think he did. All right, there it is, yes. Okay.
Man, Austin, I like this right now. He's trying to get the Divining Top out of play here when he has an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, again, that Tarn trigger still on the stack, or Tarn activation still on the stack, so if Joe were to tap the top to draw a card, then it would be shuffled away. So yeah, you definitely gotta take your spots where you can find them. And Joe actually, has to shuffle too. There is no like, well, I just won't search.
Yeah.
It's not like a path to exile. You do have to search.
So Austin has correctly identified Divining Top as public enemy number 1 here. That's for sure. He's been very aggressive, Force of Willing, Abrupt Decaying when he's got the chance. Trying to make Joe fight fair.
It's an innocuous little thing, but yeah. Definitely it's the glue that holds this deck together. Okay. So in response to Abrupt Decay, Joe cracks one Tarn and gives a respin. See what it can come up with. Looks like Brainstorm, Red Blast, and another land there. So he of course, he's not just going to let the top die. He is going to activate it and draw a card. So it's just a matter of finding a card you actually want.
Yeah. He'll get his card. And now, finally,
That Tarn.
what initiated all the fireworks
Yeah.
finally resolves.
That one Scalding Tarn hanging out, not even in the graveyard anymore. Long since been exiled to fuel Austin's shenanigans. But finally it gets to do its business, which is to retrieve a second island. And yeah, Joe in a weird spot because all of the fetch lands he has drawn have been Scalding Tarns, which means that he cannot fetch the basic planes that he will need to keep a white source around for more than one turn. That wasteland has been just hanging out over on Austin's side of the board this entire game, waiting for a real target to present itself, like that Tundra.
Yep. And I think we found it there.
Mm-hmm.
Joe with Caracas in hand, so there's no really way for him to get around the Wasteland at this point.
True. And I think generally you would rather your Tundra be wastelanded than your Caracas.
Yeah, Joe, it's such a huge part of his attack here. With his Vendilion clicks, his 2 Svencers, assuming that he boarded in the second one.
Now, of course, all right, there we go. Land drop for the turn. Joe's actually 1 land away from casting Terminus, but probably doesn't even need to do that anymore because there is a Supreme Verdict.
Yep. And a real backbreaker on the board here.
A one of, right?
Yeah, 1 copy. But as you mentioned, Divine Top, you just look at so many cards.
Yeah, I mean, we had 3 fetch lands, and with top activations, basically looked at 9 cards that turn.
Yeah.
To be fair, I think he already had the Supreme Verdict, but if he didn't, certainly a good chance of finding it. And Austin, back to square one. Just 2 lands in hand, gonna cast a Ponder, look for a little bit of action. I don't know if that counts as action or not. Finds a Wasteland, snipes away the other of Joe's white sources. We know he does have a Caracas still in hand, which he plays. And a 3rd Wasteland in hand for Austin. So.
Yeah, this is pretty brutal. I mean, Joe's going to get cut off a white here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there it goes. Uncontested. Nothing Joe can do about that. That Terminus that, again, Austin does know about. We are many, many moons from having that Terminus actually be cast.
Ugh.
Yeah, him to Turok coming down. I love watching this. I grew up playing Magic on the internet, so watching people resolve him to Turok always just tickles my fancy.
Oh, how you settle it?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels so, I don't know, old timey.
Yeah. I like it when you stare the other person in the eye and take 2 cards out of their hand. That's my preferred way to him.
All right.
That's how we did it growing up.
Sure.
Just spread out your hand and make eye contact, and you pick 2 out of there.
Oh, there was eye contact required. See, no one mentioned that part.
That wasn't required. In fact, it's, probably bad to do because it's kind of a different game at that point.
Yeah, sure. Oh, I see. You're looking for tells then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or
fair
give me
enough.
tells.
See, the concern for me was I've never actually played a deck with him to Turok. I did once play a Wild Research deck.
Okay, similar
Similar
experience.
effect. You'd search for cards and then you discard a card at random. And the way I did it, this was like regionals 2001, something like that. Whenever I would activate Wild Research, I would just kind of riffle my hand around and then pop present. And what I figured out was that if there was one card that was sticking up more than the others, then the opponent would always reach for that one.
Yeah.
and that made me really uncomfortable because then I was like super paranoid not to do that because obviously that's cheating. So I would just always trying to be very, very careful to make sure they were all exactly in order. Fanning them out and rolling dice, that seems cleaner.
Absolutely. So now we've hit this top decking war where Joe feels quite favored.
Yeah, I think so. No top in play, but there are 4 more actually, because the one that was dealt with wasn't actually destroyed. It was just shuffled in. So 4 live draws at any point for Joe to find a top, and once the top goes to work, Joe is mono gas for the rest of the game. Notably, he did find a Mystic Gate as well. So that is white sources 1 and 2. Not that will help him cast that Terminus because it was sniped away with him to Turok. And Joe taking a peek. Fanning out Austin's ample graveyard over there. Just trying to get a better idea of what's going on in Austin's library, Like, this is something that you often see, like, better players do, like, as a game. When a game's kind of, the dust is settled and we're kind of at parity, and there's a hefty stack of a graveyard over there. Just kind of pick it up, take a peek, see what's going on.
Yeah. Really an issue of counting so much as trying to get a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you'll notice something like all of the opponent's dissolves are in their graveyard, so you don't have to worry about that card or something like that. Or even if you just notice that most of them are there, it becomes less likely that you have to worry about it. In this case, dissolve probably not a card you need to worry about. Tarmogoyf, on the other hand, likely a card you need to worry about.
Yep, something proactive here. Joe, again, with his deck's never going to really run out of stuff to do necessarily, or it takes a while to get to that spot. But he's now in the spot where he has to, find answers to this Tarmogoyf. Doesn't have all day long.
And it looks like going to go for Snapcaster Mage. Does he have a Source of Plowshares in there? I think he does. I believe he discarded one to the Hymn to Truk. So, yeah, and there it is.
And I think this is going to potentially be a stifle here from Austin to fight over the Snapcaster trigger.
And there it is. Joe left with, I believe, a pair of Brainstorms in hand.
I believe Brainstorm, Misdirection in the hand now for Joe.
Okay.
Misdirection, all kinds of fun in this matchup, into Torak and especially Abrupt Decay.
Ooh. I would like to see that play out.
Oh, yeah.
Also, I would love to see Austin rip Abrupt Decay here, try to Abrupt Decay Snapcaster Mage, and then have it sent back for the, I guess 2 for 2. I guess it's just a trade.
On the other side of the bracket, or rather our backup feature match here, Fang Ho and Matthew Hightower going on to game 3.
And that's a matchup that we predicted was going to be a slog.
Yeah.
Much like this one, actually. This one has definitely turned out to be a grind, and it's certainly not over yet. The games that Austin are going to win here are going to be over relatively quickly.
Yeah.
But the games that Joe are going to win are going to be grinds.
Well, and by relatively quickly, you mean, still many, many turns.
Sure.
Game 1 was no short fest.
No. Okay. So, Tarmogoyf sticks. Jill Lossett untaps, fires off a Brainstorm, finds a Council's Judgment. So that'll solve the Tarmogoyf problem. Finds also a Wear and Tear. What does Wear and Tear do here? Austin has does he have any targets for Wear and Tear? And none of the main deck, it doesn't look like.
Well, the Null Rod potentially.
Okay. Sure. And of course, in the elimination round, the players do get a chance to see each other's deck list before they sideboard.
Yeah.
So, Joe Lossett, possibly predicting Null Rod. That's actually it. Null Rod and Graph Digger's Cage, the only targets for Wear or Tear in Austin's entire 75. Null Rod's a big one, though.
Yeah.
And of course, Wear and Tear kind of has a special distinction of being both a 1 casting cost spell and a 2 casting cost spell when you float it with when you have a counterbalance in play.
Yeah.
So, Snapcaster Mage going under the bus there, it looks like. Jumping in front of Tarmogoyf, and that would explain why. Termina's going to come off the top. This is another one of those unintuitive Miracle interactions. With the Miracle Trigger on the stack, you mentioned that the Terminus is floating out somewhere in space. Again, technically where it is Joe's hand.
And this is a mess because now I'm sure Joe is planning on casting this Council's Judgment to good effect too.
Mm-hmm.
Now that goes by the wayside.
So Terminus sent along. There will be no Terminusing, at least in this draw step.
I really like enjoying Joe do work with the Mystic Gate here. Cut off of white.
Right.
Has the 1 Mystic Gate.
Yeah, Austin put so much effort into cutting off his white sources. Yeah, you had to have. I would love to have heard the sigh that came from Austin when that Mystic Gate showed up. She's like, all right, well, I know he has these double white cards in hand, and he's down to 0, so it's at least 2 draw steps before he can cast any of them. Boom, Mystic Gate. Of course, Mystic Gate in the deck for a reason. This is a situation that comes up a lot because the Miracles decks, they have a lot of basics. Mm-hmm. Far more basics than your typical Legacy deck.
And double blue and double white needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Liliana of the Veil showing up next for Austin. We know that Joe's hand relatively inequipped to deal with this. He does have, let's see, he's already used Council's Judgment on the Tarmogoyf, so actually nothing that can solve this problem. Although Jace kind of mitigates Liliana.
It is a starting point.
So yeah, Jace the Mind Sculptor off the top for Joe. Actually has to worry about Vendilion Click here. Can't just start brainstorming. If he does that, he's going to lose a Jace. So options are Fate Seal and presumably then take the hit and have a Jace at 2 loyalty, or bounce the Vendilion Click. Neither of those actually are very exciting.
Yeah, it looks like Joe's just trying to power through his deck a little bit here. Willing to give up on this Jace. His other alternative, as you mentioned, is Fate Sealing, which is just, I think Joe's identifying that this is going to be a game that's going to be more about raw card count than preserving this Jace for as long as possible. So just paying 4 mana for Brainstorm.
Yeah. A game about raw card count, as you mentioned, as games involving Liliana of the Veil often are.
Yeah.
So taking a peek. The question is, once he puts 2 back, is he stuck with those 2 over the next couple of turns?
It appears that Joe's without a shuffler. I mean, he's got a pretty loaded hand here. He's got a Venser. He's got a Misdirection. Looks like Swords of Plowshares and Treat the Angels. It's a real hand.
And Treat the Angels is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
That's a card you can safely tuck away and have it show up and cause some serious trouble. In fact, if he puts it back on top this turn and then it comes off the top, it solves your Vendilion Click problem pretty reasonably. I mean, of course, Liliana of the Veil can deal with one of the 2 angels that would result.
Another interaction that we saw here is, once you're in the spot where you have Liliana, they're going to be empty-handed. The person playing with Liliana will be.
Yep.
And so you don't have to worry about counterspells or days coming off the top. You can just jam it for the full amount.
True. Looks like it was a Hymn to Rock off the top for Austin. Just like the immediate visceral reaction. Punch in the gut. 2 cards. Please.
And Joe can't even misdirect it for effect.
Nope.
Yeah, he just says, I'm taking them all. It's going to plus Liliana. Gets a Swords of Plowshares, a Misdirection.
Okay. Could have been a lot worse.
And now Joe back to being very resource light.
Yeah. So, resource light, but not so much because here comes Entreat right off the top. Pair of 4/4 angels. Of course, Liliana can down take to deal with 1, which I think Austin will be happy to do very quickly since there is no card in Joe's hand to get away. And the other card, the card that Joe tucked under that Entreat the Angels, is a Venser Shaper Savant.
This is still getting maybe a little more challenging than Joe anticipated now with this Creeping Tar Pit off the top for Austin.
Yeah, Creeping Tar Pit, that is a complication for sure. Now, the unfortunate thing for Joe here is that when he draws Venser, Austin, I think, is still going to be heavily incentivized to downtick Liliana again to get rid of the other angel. What you actually want to happen is for Austin to have no cards in hand, tick Liliana up, and then have you be able to use your last card in hand to be the Venser to play and bounce Liliana with Liliana's activation on the stack.
Yeah, but it looks like Joe's going to give it a shot here. And Austin does not bite.
Yeah, ticking down. There's an argument actually for flashing Inventor at that stage just to sacrifice it so you still have your angel. But, yeah, Joe going to hold on to that Venser.
Call a little more of the action that's happening.
All right. So Creeping Tar Pit going to swing in, drop Joe to 10. And again, we know that the last card in hand for Joe, a Venser, and there is Sensei's Divining Top, right on time. That is the card that Joe would have needed several turns ago to have kind of been sculpting his draws and set things up. If Joe had that top in play a couple turns ago, the turn before he cast and activated Jace, then he likely would have been able to set the Entreat up without needing to give up a Jace in the process.
Now, the concern here now is Joe's Venser is exposed.
Yes.
If Austin ticks up.
And he has nowhere to go but up. So Austin's going to cast the Tarmogoyf freshly drawn from his hand, tick up. Austin's still with 1 card in his hand. One can't imagine he's too attached to it. And Joe can respond, and it looks like that is what he's going to do by, first by spinning the top, but then he could also activate the top to get a second card in his hand and keep the Venser.
The issue is that, if he goes down that road, he has to, recommit the mana to the Divining Top, and every time he does that, it prevents the Venser from being cast. So he's kind of bottlenecked on both sides.
True.
He's stuck at exactly 4 lands.
Yeah, and we're also kind of getting to the point where dealing with Liliana with Venser is not going to be fast enough.
Yeah.
That Tarmogoyf's a burly 5/6 brawler. Creeping Tar Pit is still a thing that Joe needs to worry about. And 10 is not so many life as Joe would like. Okay, and it looks like Joe just going to leave him on top, keep his top in play, and go ahead and bin that Venser.
Yeah, that's really rough for Joe to lose the Venser there, but needs to keep that top in play, and he'll have other opportunities to engineer the board state in question.
Yeah, that's interesting. Find planes on top, which he did. He left there. That's a card he knew about. So one has to suspect then that there is something hidden underneath that planes that could cause trouble, possibly the second entreat. Oh, and here it is. All right, Tarmogoyf attacks mid-combat. Joe activates Sensei's Divining Top, flips over Entreat the Angels, miracles it, and looking at 3 now, a trio of 4/4 flyers.
Joe doing an incredible job to power through this. I mean, Austin's drawn quite well in a couple turns here.
Yeah. And Joe likely triple blocks, maybe just double blocks, but academic at this point to shove those Angels in front of the Tarmogoyf and deal with that. Austin going to cash in his Liliana to get rid of one of the 2 remaining Angels. And, replaces that Tarmogoyf with another, and now it is empty hands on both sides, 5/6 Tarmogoyf against 4/4 Angel.
And Austin's board, very hard to block right now, obviously. Tarmogoyf's in play, Creeping Tar Pit naturally can't be blocked.
Yeah, Joe, since he's not going to get much of a profitable block here, so just going to swing for 4. I think it's likely Terminus or bust at this point.
We know there's a Venser floating, so he may be able to sort of race.
Okay, sure.
Not inconceivable.
Yeah, Venser on Creeping Tar Pit is pretty nice. Joe has to hope that Austin would play a land before he would do that, but not going to come up this turn. Austin just attacks with Tarmogoyf, leaves that Creeping Tar Pit at home. And Joe activates Sensei's Divining Top, plucking the Venser that, as you mentioned, is hidden there. And down he comes. Venser Shaper Savant. One has to assume bouncing the Tarmogoyf. And Austin going to brainstorm in response.
This could be a huge daze, and I think Austin found it.
Yep, there it is. Yeah, Joe has to tap low to do this. And Austin contemplating the order of his other cards, trying to decide, do I care about the Surgical Extraction? Does that do anything? And looks like gonna take a peek at Joe's graveyard before he does anything else. You're right. I think the days, of course, that's a huge gain, and he's eager to use that. The question then is, what would you like to draw next turn?
Well, the upshot of keeping the land for next turn is that it allows him to attack with Creeping Tar Pit and Tarmogoyf and recast the Tarmogoyf in the event that Venser bounces it.
Sure.
If there's a Venser that Joe has access to.
So you're choosing them between land and Surgical Extraction.
Yeah. And this is just, these have been so many just heartbreaking turns for Joe.
Yeah.
Austin's had the right card on time so many times here.
Okay. And it looks like, Tarmogoyf going to get through. Of course, that Venser does not resolve. So lops Joe's life total in half. Joe down to 5. Tarmogoyf is lethal. Tar Pit not lethal this turn, but will be lethal the next, assuming it attacks this turn.
Yeah, and is this another trap that Joe can escape out of somehow?
And Austin going through Joe's graveyard again. I believe he did choose to draw that Surgical Extraction then. So Surgical Extraction, kind of a precision tool. Among the things it can do here, of course, it is at its best in response to a Snapcaster Mage.
Yes.
In response to a Snapcaster Mage trigger. Another thing it can do is shuffle Joe's deck, which could come up if Joe spins top, finds a thing he likes, and then tries to activate top to draw it.
See momentarily. I mean, for me right now, this feels like a fairly safe attack. I know there's a risk of Terminus, but at least Joe loses the Angel. I don't know. I think you got to fire up the Tar Pit here, too.
No, I agree. I don't think there's much of a reason not to. It looks like, Austin is going to Surgical Extraction before he attacks. And this is likely targeting Terminus.
Yeah.
Just take that option off the table.
It does give Joe a free shuffle.
It does.
But if Terminus is no longer a factor, that cuts off a lot of Joe's best outs.
Yeah. You leave Joe with running Swords to Plowshares.
Yeah.
Or the third entreat. Does he have actually a third entreat, or is it just 2?
He has 2 copies. He has a third in the sideboard,
Okay,
which one can assume has been brought in for this
Yes.
matchup.
Okay. So yeah, that third entreat would be fantastic right about now.
Well, the issue here now is Joe needs to find an answer in the top 3 to something.
True. Okay. All right. I guess it would not be actually fantastic this next turn or this next draw step.
Yeah.
Needs first to find a solution to Creeping Tar Pit. And Terminus will not be among those solutions because they are all exiled. Austin falls 12 in the process. Yeah, I see a lot of players board in Surgical Extraction in spots where I would not want that card.
Yeah.
This is a spot where actually I'm a little impressed with how reasonable it has been here.
Well, now at this point, I feel like you had to fire up the Tar Pit. Now the card you're playing around is no longer a factor.
Yeah. Okay. Just felt like you missed one. There we go. There is the possibility that would be Snapcaster Mage, I guess. And I think the contention is, did he miss it? No, it's still there.
Yeah. Not impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And Austin knows that the next draw step here is a land. It's a good spot to crack the fetch land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one land will not help him. Okay, it looks like he is not going to choose to activate the Tar Pit. Just going to crack in with Tarmogoyf. And it looks like Joe spins the top, would have found red Elemental Blast, which is an answer to the Tar Pit.
Yeah, though no red mana available this turn.
True.
And that's why this is such a huge cost.
Mm-hmm.
Joe would go down to 2, and now you have 2 lethal attackers.
Yep. And yeah, Tarmogoyf, it looks like he's going back to the hand there for Austin because Jace does come down off the top, bounces it back. And yeah, this looks like Joe's going to kind of slip out of the noose here.
Well, right now the Tar Pit can take care of Jace, and then we kind of reset this.
True. Okay, but left the red Elemental Blast on top, so is able to activate top, draw red Elemental Blast, kill off the Tar Pit, and Austin now stuck with Tarmogoyf in hand, has to pass without it in play, and Joe gets to untap
Joe has,
with a Jace.
Again, slipped out of this.
Wow, okay. Yeah, this game felt over.
Yeah. Well, I think that last turn, Austin really needs to fire in.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so new lease on life. Joe Lossett has his priorities straight. First things first, we're going to get that top back in play.
Yeah.
And then he's going to give the Jace a spin, looks like. Or no, actually, that was actually activating top. So has he brainstormed first thing with Jace then?
And now we're in the spot where Joe has to feel like a pretty heavy favorite.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that he no longer has Terminus in the deck means that, if Austin can draw multiple creatures and just dump them into play, maybe able to overwhelm Jace.
True. Yeah, Jace actually can function as a proper win condition here, given enough time, I think. So Joe is going to be looking to basically answer Austin's draw steps one for one, including that Tarmogoyf that he knows is there. But yeah, I think he's actually pretty well equipped to do that. And let's see, takes another peek with top. I know I saw another top. Sensei's Divining Top, oddly enough, looks a lot like Entreat the Angels. I got really excited there for a second. But just going to pass him back. And looks like him to rock the draw for Austin. Does have the land to be able to play him and Tarmogoyf this turn while still keeping that Verdant Catacomb uncracked. So Austin's going to lead with Tarmogoyf. Joe's going to spin the top in response. Oh, that is actually the Entreat the Angels.
There is an Entreat floating on there, yep.
Okay. So Joe's main concern then is not getting his Entreat dazed, stifled, something like that.
Again, still, the problem is now with this Tarmogoyf, Joe is kind of compelled to unsummon or find a removal spell.
Mm-hmm.
So it still feels like the game's kind of getting to a spot where he is going to have to entreat sooner rather than later.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. He does unsummon rather than brainstorm, go digging for some extra cards. And looks like Austin finds a Ponder. So Austin's going to get a chance to do some digging of his own if he chooses to ponder up, again, a Daze, a Spell Pierce, a Stifle. Now, he doesn't know necessarily that those are the cards that he needs here, in that he doesn't know the Entreat is on top, although he does know that it's the scariest card, and that Joe is going to be actively looking for it. So Austin does, in fact, go for that Ponder.
He's moving the Spell Pierce to the top, and it makes a lot of sense because he can cast the Tarmogoyf here. Joe has represented that he does not have creature removal, so the Jace gets out of the way.
Yeah,
And then you have to an opportunity to potentially pierce.
Yeah, and you're in a tough spot if you're Joe. So he's going to activate the top on Austin's end step. And the question is, how much does he want to pay?
Doesn't Entreat for 2 get the job done here? I mean, I suppose it does.
Yeah, I think it
Entreat
does.
for 2, unsummon.
Yep. Ooh, that is one
Oh,
more
boy.
than... Uh-oh. Ouch.
Austin
Wow.
staves off death.
Ooh, okay. Yeah, Entreat for 2 feels great there. But Entreat for 3 feels better. But Entreat for 0 feels worse. So, yeah, Joe Lossett marches that third and final Entreat the Angels into Austin's Spell Pierce. And untaps in a bind here.
Yeah, I mean, he has to protect this Jason. Joe may be running into the spot where he might be also running out of ways to literally win the game.
Yeah, yeah, he has been through all of his entreats. He can snapcast an entreat.
That is a
Yes, that requires
that is a slog.
It is, yeah. If that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. Other than that, yeah, he can win with Vendilion Click or Venter. Speaking of slogs, that'll be a while too. But all the while, he is juggling this Tarmogoyf with no Terminuses left in his deck. Tarmogoyf is a lethal attacker. It's going to swing in.
And we'll see what Joe has.
This is going to be the old Vendilion Click Force Field, perhaps.
I think so.
Yeah, last card in hand. There it is. Vendilion Click. Going to come down. Take a peek at Austin's hand. Austin has Deathrite Shaman and him. I suspect that Shaman is going to be sent away. And Joe's going to consider his options. I can't imagine him as a card you actually care about at this stage.
Well, if Joe's plan is to force field with the Vendilion Click plus Caracas, it is a consideration.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, him will kind of break up the Vendilion Click pattern at any point. Sort of. I mean, you can cast the Vendilion Click, let the him resolve, and then bounce it. But then you don't get to block Tarmogoyf for that one turn. That may be the only turn he needs.
Right. And so again, the die is cast, and Joe just has to let it go here. He's going to get himmed, but he couldn't allow Austin to keep Deathrite Shaman in this spot.
Sure. And yeah, him is going to resolve. There is that misdirection. So Joe could activate the top, draw misdirection, and then pitch Vendilion Click to the misdirection and send the him back.
Yeah, whatever the last card is in Austin's hand.
You're gonna lose cards anyway. I mean, you end up down a card by doing that because the top is on top of your deck instead of in play.
And the other factor is the misdirection may have more value over the long term. Maybe you get an Abrupt Decay instead of a random card.
Maybe. If you're going to get more value out of that misdirection, you need to do so real quick.
So Joe with another brainstorm here.
Finds a blast, another top, and that misdirection that we knew about.
So, I mean, he has an answer to the Delver, but no help to the Tarmogoyf here. He's going to have to top again.
Yeah. Now he can unsummon the Tarmogoyf this last turn. Although no, that was not a physical brainstorm. That was a Jace brainstorm.
That was a Jace brainstorm.
Okay. So Jace has done his trick for the turn, and that is going to leave Joe without an answer. It looks like.
Well, Joe did spin and put something very quickly to the top of his deck. So.
Sure. Ponder revealed off the top. Insectile Aberration is going to come out to play.
It is really hard to put Joe down.
It really is. An admirable trait for sure. And Austin's going to cast a Ponder before he attacks. Is going to see Force of Will, which he cannot cast this turn.
Oh, God, I think he may have just found the Crozan Grip. If Joe left something on top of his deck.
He does not have access to it.
Oh, my goodness.
So that will do it. Joe dead on board. Austin going to swing. Joe has a blast. Get rid of the flyer. Tarmogoyf's still a problem.
Still coming across.
Extends
There it
the match.
is. Wow. Austin Williams, 2-0 over Joe Lossett. Unbelievable. You know, there was a lot of interesting stuff going on from Austin in that match. There were moments of seemingly missing some pretty straightforward lines of